The rescuer raised his axe, ready to chop through what looked like a piece of frozen trash sticking out of the Arctic snow. It was black, rigid, and lifeless against the endless white of the Brooks Range. He didn't know that beneath 4 feet of solid ice, a man was listening to the footsteps above him. He didn't know that the black object wasn't garbage, it was a boot. And inside that boot was a foot attached to a man who had spent 3 days buried in a grave of his own making, waiting for his heart to stop. This isn't just a story about the cold. It is a story about the Swiss cheese effect, the terrifying reality that disaster doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small, invisible layers, a forgotten map, a snapped cord, a moment of ego. These small holes align until you are trapped in a silence so loud it begins to speak to you. From the vertical cliffs of Yosemite to the 40 below darkness of the Arctic Circle, we are going to deconstruct the anatomy of getting lost. We will uncover why an expert survival instructor panicked in a desert, why a 22-year-old girl started talking to her dead grandmother, and how Lonnie Arnold survived being buried alive when he had already accepted his own death. But before we face the ice, we have to understand the mind. Because the wilderness doesn't kill you. The panic does. I learned this the hard way. The night was pitch black, and I couldn't see a thing. I stumbled out from the trees in the Idaho backcountry, my hands stretched out like antennas, trying to feel the world before I crashed into it. The sagebrush snagged my feet. I fell. My stomach dropped. My heart skipped a beat. I was only a mile from the hot spring where I had just been soaking. But by the time I crawled out of the pool, night had fallen and I couldn't find my headlamp. I couldn't find my lighter. I thought I could navigate by the river, but the trees loomed dark like a narrow alley closing in on all sides. I had to admit the one thing no one ever wants to admit. I was lost. No one knew I was there. And I was freezing. The past week had been an emotional whirlwind. I had quit my job, sold my car, and packed my life to join the Peace Corps in Morocco. Then, days before orientation, my application was revoked. I was drifting, untethered. So I did what I always do. I headed for the wilderness. I knew the risks. In March, the cold of the Rockies makes the wilderness feel as if it begins right outside your skin. I knew that starting a hike between 2 p.m. and 3 p.m. is the fatal window, too late to go far, too early to camp. I knew all of this because I had decades of experience. I had worked on trail crews for 13 years. I had been a fire lookout. I had pack rafted 80 miles through Alaska. I thought I was immune. I thought experience was a shield. But as I fumbled in the darkness, shivering in the silence of the tomb, I realized that nature doesn't care about your resume. I promised myself that night, as the cold seeped into my bones, that if I survived, I would learn everything about the art of survival. Because no matter how much time you spend in the wild, eventually you will get turned around. It happens to everyone, even the teachers. In 1985, Susan Purvis was a survival instructor for the School of Urban and Wilderness Survival. She taught troubled kids how to stay alive. But in the Utah desert, she broke the cardinal rule. She split the group. Purvis took a teenage girl, a student who wasn't physically fit, and decided to take a shortcut. She wanted to prove she could navigate a drainage area to reach their meeting spot faster. It was a decision driven by ego, not logic. They descended into the canyon, and the trap snapped shut. They ended up in the wrong place. The other group was nowhere to be found. The sky turned that bruised purple color that signals a storm, and the night grew dark. Purvis didn't stop. She got angry. She blamed the girl. She blamed the map. She screamed, "Get your ass up and move!" as they stumbled over sagebrush in the dark. This is the expert halo, the false belief that mishaps happen to tourists, not to you. The desert is an unforgiving place. Mirages haunt the mind in the heat, twisting logic until it snaps. But the nights are worse. They become bitterly frigid. Purvis and the girl had a poncho, some rice, and no reliable fire starter. She pressed on, fueled by denial. "I thought I could fix the problem," she later said. "Instead, I became the problem." But then something shifted. The rain started to fall, cold and hard. They stumbled upon a wickiup, a primitive shelter left by their school. Seeing that small structure broke the fever of her panic. She realized they wouldn't freeze. She realized she didn't have to kill the girl with exhaustion to save her. They huddled together for warmth, shivering through the night. By dawn, the head instructor was tracking their footsteps. When he found them, 15 hours later, Purvis was still in the grip of denial. "Where the hell have you been?" he asked. Her reply was immediate. "We're not lost." She had cycled through the classic stages of grief. Denial, anger, bargaining. If they hadn't found that shelter, she would have slipped into depression, the stage where the will to live simply evaporates. Today, Purvis tells everyone the same thing. If you're lost, stay put. Wear blue, because blue doesn't exist in nature. And above all, stop and breathe, because navigation is a lost art, and technology will eventually bite you in the butt. Batteries die. GPS signals fade, but your mind is the one tool you can't afford to lose. But sometimes the danger isn't getting lost, it's getting stuck. In late September 2005, Mike Shadle and Abre Cloud were in Yosemite. They were young, in their early 20s, and newly dating. They wanted to impress each other. They planned to climb the east buttress of Middle Cathedral Rock, a classic 11-pitch ascent. Mike had a decade of climbing experience. Abre was new. Friends told them it was a casual route. "No big deal," they said. "You'll cruise it." So they made the first mistake. They started late, around 11 a.m. Then came the second mistake. Mike didn't bring a topographic map. He didn't bring headlamps. They brought one water bottle each. This is what experts call the Swiss cheese effect. A disaster rarely comes from one massive failure. It comes from layers of small mistakes, holes in the cheese that align perfectly to let the catastrophe pass through. The valley floor was warm, sunny, beautiful. They wore shorts. Mike led the pitches, placing traditional gear into the rock cracks. But midway through a chimney section, a vertical fissure you climb by bracing your back against the wall, the rope slowed. Mike looked down from 140 feet up. Abre was struggling. It was her first chimney climb. He had to yell instructions down to her. "Move your hands down! Move your feet up!" By the time she reached him, she was punch-drunk, physically and mentally exhausted. They were 600 feet off the ground. Going down seemed harder than going up. So they kept climbing. Dusk began to settle over the valley, and with the darkness came the physiological betrayal. The typical profile of a lost hiker is a male between 20 and 25 years old. Men are more likely to push ahead without a plan. Mike was 24. As the light faded, his amygdala, the lizard brain responsible for fear, hijacked his system. Adrenaline flooded his blood. His heart rate spiked. His breathing became rapid. This is the body's fight-or-flight response, but on a cliff face, there is nowhere to run. Fear disrupts the metabolic processes. It pumps cortisol into the brain, impairing memory and cognitive function. It makes the familiar look alien. Mike started making rushed decisions. He climbed higher, faster, placing less protection. A single slip would have been fatal. He scrambled up a mossy, pine needle-covered corner and suddenly realized the truth. He was off route. No classic climb would be this overgrown. He couldn't down-climb in the dark. He had Abre lower him to a ledge. It was barely big enough for half their butts. Night fell. They were out of food. They were out of water. The temperature dropped below 40 degrees. They tied themselves into the rock and huddled together, wrapping the rope around their legs for warmth. Cloud dozed fitfully between Mike's legs. Their limbs went numb. Their backs ached. They were trapped in the visceral reality of exposure. At sunrise, they had to wait for the feeling to return to their frozen limbs before they could move. They managed to finish the climb and hike off, but the lesson was burned into them. When small errors begin to accumulate, Mike said later, that's when problems arise. It's difficult to recognize when to stop because they seem insignificant on their own. Mike and Abre had each other. They had body heat. They had a partner to check their reality. But what happens when you are alone? What happens when the isolation is so profound that your mind splits in two just to keep you company? In early May 2017, Madeline Connolly was 22 years old. She stopped her car near East Glacier Park in Montana to let her dog Mogi out for a drink. It was a beautiful spring day, 80 degrees. The scent of pine hung in the air. She walked down to a river. On a whim, she jumped into a pond fully clothed, planning to dry off in the sun. Then, she made the fatal error. She tried to take a shortcut back to her car. She slipped. She fell into the rushing spring runoff. Mogi's leash wrapped around her neck, choking her. She clawed herself free, but the panic sent her into a tailspin. Her heart pounding, she veered off course, heading deeper into the Great Bear Wilderness. She had no map, no compass, no bear spray, no water. Just her car keys, a dog leash, and a $20 bill in her pocket. That night, the temperature plummeted. She curled up in a tree well, the only snow-free space she could find, and clung to Mogi for warmth. In the distance, wolves howled. She could hear their footsteps crunching on the hard-packed snow nearby. By the third day, she was coughing up blood. She was hiding in hollowed-out trees while sleet hammered the forest. She saw a helicopter overhead, 2 Bear Air, but she didn't wave. In her delirium, she worried she would be billed for the rescue. She didn't know the service was free. She found a moose bone on the trail. A bad sign. It meant large predators were close. On day 5, the snow firmed up, but her mind began to fracture. She collapsed on a rock, chewed a yellow flower, and began to pray. That is when she saw her grandmother. Her grandmother was dead, but Madeline saw her standing there, clear as day. "You're going to make it," her grandmother said. "Go back the way you came." This is known as the third man factor. It is a phenomenon reported by climbers, solo sailors, and polar explorers. Ernest Shackleton wrote about it. Joe Simpson felt it in the crevasse. When the mind reaches the absolute limit of endurance, it creates a companion, a guardian angel, a hallucination that saves your life. Madeline stopped panicking. Her mind became her best friend. She retraced her steps. On the 7th day, she found pink tape marked SAR. She found boot tracks. And then she found the rescuers. She had survived 7 days without food, sleeping in the snow, with only her dog and a ghost to keep her alive. "Now, I carry a deep love for myself," she said. Once you've seen how dark your own mind can get, you understand that you never truly know what someone else is battling. Madeline had the spring. She had water, but 80 miles north of the Arctic Circle, there is no water. There is only ice. And the cold there doesn't just freeze you, it erases you. In February 2012, Lonnie Arnold was traveling by snowmobile from Covellina, Alaska. It was 40 degrees below zero. The sun never breached the horizon, leaving the world in a perpetual gray twilight. Lonnie was dressed for the cold. Black ski pants, a beaver fur hat, thick gloves. But he was about to face a storm that would strip him of everything but his will. A blizzard struck. Winds hit 120 miles per hour. The fine-grained snow clogged his snowmobile's air intake. The engine stalled. Lonnie pulled the starting cord. Again. And again. The rage built up in his chest. On the final pull, the rope snapped. He was thrown back 15 feet into the whiteout. The storm was so thick he couldn't see the machine he had just been standing next to. He did the right thing at first. He stayed put for 8 hours, but the weather didn't break. He started walking. The snow was waist deep. For every step he took up a hill, he slipped back 2. He was exhausted, dehydrated. The cold was a physical weight, pressing down on his chest. By the time he crested the hill, he was done. He couldn't go on. "Lord, have them find me right here," he prayed. "I won't move anywhere." He dug a hole in the snow, 5 feet long, 3 feet wide, 1 foot deep. He called it his grave. He buried his lower body and chest to insulate himself from the killing wind, and he fell asleep. On the second night, the wolves came, a pack of 4. They howled nearby, their voices cutting through the wind. Lonnie lay still, frozen in his ice coffin, trying to suppress his fear. He knew that if they sensed he was alive, he was meat. By the third night, there were more wolves. 8, maybe 12. They were closer. Somewhere between the darkness and the cold, Lonnie Arnold believed he died. He saw his grandparents, just like Madeline. They stood before him in the white darkness. "My son," they said, "it's not your time. What are you doing here? I'm sending you home. You have more to do." "The next thing I know," Lonnie said, "I was back on Earth." He heard the whine of snowmobiles. A rescuer saw a black object sticking out of the snowbank. He thought it was a trash bag. He raised his axe. It was Lonnie's boot. His left foot was frozen solid, encased in ice. Snow had gathered 4 feet on top of his body. The search team had to use axes, shovels, and picks to release him from the jaws of winter. At the hospital, the doctor looked at his foot. It was dead flesh. "We have to amputate," the doctor said. "You guys aren't taking off my foot," Lonnie whispered. "I'll die with all my limbs attached." They saved his foot. It was a medical miracle. But the nerves were shattered. To this day, he feels a sharp pain shooting from his heel to his toe. "It feels like someone is hammering a nail into it," he says, over and over. Whether Lonnie actually died, or whether the third man factor pulled him back from the brink, is not for us to decide. The veil between the living and the dead had thinned just enough for him to slip back through. All of these stories leave us with one question. Why do some people survive while others vanish? Joe Blattner, a search and rescue chief, says the survivors share a specific profile. They have purpose. They have positivity. They have drive. They occupy their minds with tasks. They celebrate small victories. A wiki up, a sunrise, a hallucination of a loved one. Back in Idaho, after 8 hours of panic, the moon rose high enough to light my path. I calmed my racing heart. I took 3 deep breaths. I found the creek. I found the trail. The next day, I found my headlamp in the back seat of my car. It had been there the whole time, a symbol of how preparedness can be forgotten in a single moment of panic. The wilderness is a mirror. It shows you exactly who you are. It strips away the ego, the resume, and the technology. It leaves you with nothing but your own mind. And sometimes, that mind is the only thing that can save you. Survival isn't about fighting the wild. It's about conquering the panic inside you long enough for the wild to let you go. For those of us watching from the safety of our homes, it's easy to judge. It's easy to say we would have brought a map or stayed with the snowmobile, but until you are standing in the pitch black, with your hands stretched out like antennas, you don't know who you will meet in the dark. If these stories of human resilience touch something in you, consider subscribing to the channel. We explore the limits of endurance every week. And if you want to understand what happens when the threat isn't the cold but the heat, click the video on your screen now. We're going to the Sahara, where a man drank his own radiator fluid to stay alive. See you in the next one. The rescuer thought he was looking at a piece of trash, a black garbage bag sticking out of the Arctic snow. He raised his axe to clear it. He didn't know that beneath 4 feet of ice, a man was listening to his own heart stop. This isn't just a story about the cold. It is a story about the Swiss cheese effect, the terrifying reality that disaster doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small, invisible layers until you are trapped in a grave of your own making. From the cliffs of Yosemite to the negative 40-degree darkness of the Arctic Circle, we will deconstruct the anatomy of getting lost. We will uncover why an expert survival instructor panicked in a desert, why a 22-year-old girl started talking to her dead grandmother, and how Lonnie Arnold survived being buried alive for days. But the real mystery isn't the cold. It is something psychologists call the third man factor. When the body is broken and the mind is fracturing, who is that voice that tells you to keep moving? Why did Lonnie Arnold believe he had actually died on the third night? And was the figure standing in the snow a hallucination or something else entirely? The night is pitch black and I cannot see a thing. I stumble out from the trees, hands stretched out like antennas. The sagebrush and rocks snag my feet, and I fall. My stomach drops. My heart skips a beat. My palms are scratched and bleeding. I'm trying to find my campsite, a mile from the Idaho backcountry hot spring where I have just been soaking. By the time I crawled out of the pool, night had fallen, and I could not find my headlamp or my lighter. I thought I could find my way back by going downstream, where the trees loomed dark like a narrow alley. Now I have to admit to myself that I am lost. No one knows I am here, and I am freezing. The past week had been an emotional whirlwind. For a year, I had prepared to join the Peace Corps in Morocco, giving up my job, my car, and my rental house. But days before orientation, my application was revoked. Suddenly, I was left to piece my life back together. I did what I do best. I headed for the wilderness. But in March, the cold of the Rockies makes the wilderness feel as if it begins right outside your body. The very real risks of hypothermia or frostbite raise the danger for anyone who strays off course. I knew all of this. I had decades of experience in the backcountry. I had worked on trail crews for 13 years, served 2 seasons as a fire lookout, and pack rafted 80 miles in Alaska. In short, I never thought this would happen to me. But the wilderness doesn't care about your resume. Nationwide, roughly 100,000 search and rescue missions are conducted each year. And that night, as I fumbled in the darkness, I realized that experience can be a trap. It is a phenomenon known as the expert halo, the false belief that mishaps happen to tourists, not to you. In 1985, Susan Purvis was a survival instructor for the School of Urban and Wilderness Survival. She taught people how to stay alive, but in the Utah desert, the teacher was about to become the student. Purvis split up with her group of troubled inner-city kids, agreeing to meet another instructor that evening. She brought along a teenage girl who wasn't physically fit, and she made a decision that haunts every survivalist. She took a shortcut. She descended into a drainage area, believing they would reach the spot faster. They ended up in the wrong place. The other group was nowhere to be found. The sky looked ominous, as if it would rain, and the night grew dark. Purvis became angry. She blamed everyone but herself. She even criticized the girl for being out of shape. The girl began to cry and sat down, prompting Purvis to scream in frustration. "There is no time for this. Get your ass up and move." This is the danger of the ego in the wild. Purvis was in denial. She told herself, "We're not lost." But the desert is an unforgiving place. Mirages haunt the mind in the heat, causing logic to unravel. And people often forget that desert nights can become bitterly frigid. They carried little more than a poncho, some rice, and no reliable fire starter. Looking back, she realized she felt foolish for breaking the rules. Her ego had gotten involved. She thought she could fix the problem. Instead, she became the problem. As they stumbled over sagebrush in the dark, Purvis yelled into the void, "How could this be?" It started to rain. Just as panic threatened to take over, they stumbled upon a wiki-up, a primitive shelter used by their school. This unexpected discovery shifted Purvis's demeanor completely. It was a moment of grace. She realized they would not freeze to death. She realized she would not kill the girl by pushing her too hard. That night, the survival instructor huddled together with her student for warmth. By dawn, the head instructor began tracking Purvis's footsteps. Around 2 p.m., they finally reached a road. A familiar Suburban pulled up. Purvis's boss. He had been looking for them for 15 hours. "Where the hell have you been, and how did you get lost?" he asked. In denial, she replied, "We're not lost." It took 40 years for Purvis to realize she had cycled through the classic stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, and despair. If they hadn't found that shelter, she feared she would have slipped into depression, the stage where all hope fades and one feels like giving up. Today, she tells everyone that navigation is a lost art. Batteries die, GPS fails, but if you panic, you die first. While Susan Purvis battled her ego in the desert, 2 young climbers in Yosemite were about to learn that confidence can be just as deadly as incompetence. Mike Shadle and Aubrey Cloud were in their early 20s. They were newly dating and eager to please each other. It was late September 2005. They planned to climb the east buttress of Middle Cathedral Rock, a classic 1,100-foot ascent. Shadle had more than a decade of experience. Cloud was relatively new. Friends told them it was a perfect route. "It's totally casual," they said. "No big deal, you'll cruise it." With that relaxed assessment, they prepared their gear. 1 water bottle each, food for the day. They set out around 11 a.m., a dangerously late start for a climb of that magnitude. Shadle, who handled the planning, neglected to bring a topographic map. They had no headlamps. They had no cell phones. This is what experts call the Swiss cheese effect. A disaster rarely comes from one big mistake. It comes from multiple small ones that align, like holes in a stack of cheese slices, allowing catastrophe to slip through. The Yosemite Valley floor is 4,000 feet above sea level. The weather was beautiful. Sunny skies, temperatures in the 70s. Shadle led each pitch, placing gear into the wall. Things went smoothly at first, but midway through the first chimney section, a narrow vertical crack you climb by bracing your body against both walls, the ropes slowed. That is when Shadle realized it was Cloud's first chimney climbs. It was not the best time to learn. Yelling down from 140 feet up, he explained the technique. Move your hands down, move your feet up, push your back up the wall. Once she finally made it up, he could tell she was punch-drunk, mentally and physically exhausted. By that point, they were 600 feet above the ground. Up seemed easier than down, but the holes in the cheese were aligning. The second chimney pitch spent Cloud's energy even further, and dusk was underway. The typical profile of a lost hiker is a man between the ages of 20 and 25. Men are more likely to push ahead without a plan. Shadle was 24. As dusk approached, panic set in. It triggered his fight-or-flight response. The amygdala is a small, almond-shaped part of the brain that processes fear. When it activates, it hijacks the system. It floods the body with adrenaline. It increases the heart rate. It disrupts decision-making. Shadle started making rushed decisions. He climbed higher without placing enough protection. Without that gear, a single slip could have been fatal. He scrambled up a mossy, pine needle-covered corner and suddenly realized he was off route. No classic climb with heavy summer traffic would be this overgrown. He was lost on a vertical wall. Unable to down-climb in the dark, he had Cloud lower him. By then, night had fallen. They were out of food, they were out of water, and they were stuck on a ledge barely big enough for half their butts. They tied in and settled as best they could, sitting upright, wrapping the rope around their legs for warmth. Temperatures dropped to below 40 degrees. The rock held a little residual heat, but not enough. Cloud dozed fitfully between Shadle's legs. Their limbs went numb. Their backs ached. They braced for a long, cold night. Fear disrupts the very thing you need to survive, your mind. It makes the familiar look alien. Increased cortisol impairs memory formation, making it harder to recognize cues that would be obvious in daylight. Mike and Aubrey survived the night. At sunrise, they had to wait for the feeling to return to their frozen limbs before they could finish the climb. Looking back, Shadle feels sheepish. Today, they have been married for 18 years. But Cloud still double-checks the gear, because they learned the hard way that when small errors begin to accumulate, that is when the grave opens up. Mike and Aubrey had each other. But what happens when you are alone, and the only voice you hear is your own panic? In early May 2017, Madeline Connolly, 22, made the drive to East Glacier Park in Montana. She decided to go for a short hike with her rescue dog, Mogi. It was a beautiful 80-degree spring day. The snow was melting. The scent of pine hung in the air. She wore orange bib overalls, a t-shirt, and hiking boots. She had no map, no compass, no bear spray, no water. Only her car keys, a dog leash, and a $20 bill in her pocket. Along the way, she came across a pond. On a whim, she jumped in, fully clothed, planning to dry off in the sun. It was an innocent moment of joy. But it was the first hole in the cheese. Instead of returning the same way, she tried to take a shortcut back to her car. While retracing her steps, she slipped on a wet rock. She and Mogi fell into the rushing spring runoff. The dog's leash wrapped around her neck, choking her.